Welcome, and thank you for joining us today for an exciting episode 5. This is Let's Talk Water New Mexico, a podcast that is put together and sponsored by the New Mexico Produced Water Research Consortium. The intent of this podcast is to share details and information around treated produced water and the part it can play in the challenges around water supply in the Southwest. I'm Evan Lamoureux, and I'm one of the hosts for this podcast.
And I'm Liz Jolly. I'm your other host. Thanks for joining. In our previous podcast, we've talked about the emerging challenges of freshwater supplies due to changing climate and the need to have alternative water supplies, such as non-traditional water resources. These include industrial or municipal wastewater or even brackish water. And this non-traditional water usage could include industrial or construction use, agricultural or rangeland applications, ecological habitat restoration, or even water supply augmentation options. Glad you're here.
This current episode today, episode 5, focuses on providing an overview of the preliminary research findings of the consortium. The conversation will center around the characterization of produced water quality and the evaluation of treatment technologies through pilot-scale demonstration. We will also cover the general risk and safety of treated produced water and potential impacts for reuse on soil and plant health.
Well, let's start with introducing our guest today. First, we're going to introduce Dr. Pei Xu, who we've heard from in our previous podcast. Pei, why don't you introduce yourself to our listeners?
Thank you, Liz and Evan, for hosting this podcast again. And it is such a pleasure to participate in the podcast. I'm Pei Xu, a professor in environmental engineering at New Mexico State University. I also serve as the research director of the New Mexico Produced Water Research Consortium. My research is focused on water quality and application of water treatment and desalination technologies to create new water supplies.
Thank you, Dr. Xu. We appreciate you joining us today. Next, we will introduce a new guest, Lisa Henthorne. Welcome, Lisa. Will you please introduce yourself?
Certainly, and thank you for the opportunity to be here today. I'm Lisa Henthorne. I work as the chief scientist for Aris Water. And for those of you unfamiliar with Aris, it's one of the major produced water midstream companies that we manage and collect, dispose, and treat produced water for the oil and gas producers, primarily in the Permian Basin.
Thanks, Lisa, for the introduction. And our final guest is Dr. Mahoj Schkula. Can you introduce yourself?
Good. So Mahoj Schkula, I'm a professor of soil physics at New Mexico State University. I also serve as the director of the College of ACES Global Program and Aggies Go Global. And from last year, I have also taken over as the faculty fellow for New Mexico State University's international program. I do research related to the brackish water and produced water application and its effect on soil and plant.
Awesome. Thanks for joining us today, and thank you all for being here and for those introductions. So we're going to jump into the conversation. We're going to start with Lisa today. Can you share with us some perspective on the drivers for produced water reuse and some of the applications that you think are going to be most interested to the audience today?
It's important for the listeners to first understand the types of volumes of water that we're talking about. So in the Permian Basin, we every day produce about 15 million barrels of water. You can think about 42 gallons per barrel. You can figure out the vast amount of water that we're producing. And of course, we're producing it in an area that's very arid. And as we produce that water, along with the oil and gas, we separate the two streams, and then we have to dispose of that water. So we use saltwater disposal wells that are deep wells that push that water back underground. And fundamentally, we want to be able to use that water in an area that has such water scarcity issues, and also avoid the cost of transporting that water and the cost of disposal, a large amount of energy required to dispose of that water into saltwater disposal wells. So that drives a lot of our interest. Presently, we also reuse the water that comes up. We try to reuse it as much as we can, but we have to, because of regulation, we can only use it within the oil and gas industry. So we use that water today for subsequent completions activities, fracking operations, as many people refer to it, so that we at least get another use of that water. And then sometimes that water comes up again in that new well, and then we reuse it again. And we do some treatment to that water before we reuse it in our completions activities, but it's not the level of treatment that we require for us to be able to do other things with the water. And those other things include potential agriculture applications, particularly those that are around non-consumptive crops, like cotton, for instance, or biofuel-related crops. Surface discharge is an area that we have a lot of interest in.
It's just amazing of the amount of water that's coming back, as we're producing oil and gas. And so I can understand the challenges, and the importance of cost and having options on how we can use that.
Yeah, the important, anytime you're treating water, the more water you can treat, the lower the cost is per gallon or per barrel of water. So that's one of the things that drives us to need large users of this water. Unfortunately in the Permian Basin, we don't have a lot of large water user industries presently. It's attracting, if they know the water is there, then attracting some of those industries. One of the areas, of course, that can use an abundance of water is the environment, and demonstrating that we can treat this water to a quality that meets all of the environmental discharge requirements would be a real gain for us all and for the communities in the area. And the same goes for using it in agriculture applications, right? It's demonstrating that we can consistently meet the quality that's required for these ag applications. Those are all some of the activities that are going on under the umbrella of the consortium.
And I guess that makes sense, and that's kind of maybe where we can pivot a little bit to the research, the research that's going on, so that we can expand the use cases, right? I mean, that research is critical for us to be able to pivot just outside of oil and gas and find use cases in these other industries.
Absolutely. And, that's, again, part of the consortium, is providing a lot of that underpinning knowledge around the risk associated with using this water in other, for other uses. Also, we need a lot of tools, and some of those are technology tools, right, to be able to meet the water requirements that we have, the water quality requirements, but also tools in making sure that we know how to take the samples and that we know how the samples should be analyzed and what they should be analyzed for. A lot of these are, kind of fundamental tools that the consortium is contributing towards the development of, and all of the industry is benefiting from that.
So Lisa, it sounds like there's a lot of research going on. Where is the funding for this research coming from?
Well, a number of different sources. I mean, the consortium does have some funding that it's providing for some of the research activities. There's also the companies themselves are contributing towards the research activities, particularly the pilots now, as we move into the pilot phase of, demonstrating that these technologies have the capability to meet the water quality requirements that we have, but also to better understand any potential risk, as well as the cost associated with the treatment. At the end of the day, we want to be able to do this at the best price we can, so that we can, in fact, continue to do this for many years to come. So the funding for those activities are coming from a broad range of contributors, including the federal government is contributing to some individual projects. For instance, DOE has some funding sources that they're providing. So it's a combination.
Yeah, thanks, Lisa. Pei, did you want to build on Lisa's comments?
Absolutely. So in addition to what Lisa has mentioned, the consortium is also actively applying for fundings from federal and state agencies. For example, our research on evaluation of innovative produced water treatment technologies and assessment of risk and toxicology during reuse is funded by the Bureau of Reclamation and the state of New Mexico. I totally agree with Lisa mentioned that we also have tremendous support from the industry, not only on the pilot scale testing, but also by sharing that data on the water quality information, so we can have a better understanding on the temporal and the spatial variation of produced water quality in the basin. We have also worked with the Groundwater Protection Council to develop a New Mexico produced water data portal. So this is a web-based online system that allows visitors to view, download, and interact with produced water quantity and quality data with a GIS component. As Lisa mentioned, we need tools, different tools. I think this would be a good tool for us to manage the produced water in the Permian Basin. We also developed the GIS tool that mapped out the beneficial use options. For example, this is the water demand for agriculture irrigation. So that will also help us to make the decision on beneficial use of produced water.
I would like to mention every episode that we've done so far, I hear more and more organizations mentioned for the first time. And I believe it's truly amazing the level of collaboration that's taking place. There's clearly a large number of organizations involved, ranging from government agencies to public companies and, of course, academia. This makes it a great opportunity to tie back to the tagline of the consortium, seizing the opportunity to solve water challenges through innovation and collaboration.
So Lisa, can you build on what Pei was describing and really talk to us about how the industry is working and developing pilots to test out and demonstrate treatment effectiveness, cost, and the fit for purpose reuse?
Yeah, I mean, it gets to your previous comments about the enormous amount of collaboration that's going on in the industry and, coming together to solve common problems and really, bringing their resources together to make, the biggest impact that they can. One example is the joint industry project that Aris Water has with ConocoPhillips, Exxon, and Chevron to evaluate different desalination technologies. And I know you will speak more about the water quality of our produced water in a moment, but it's a very high salinity water stream. And so traditional desalination technologies like seawater reverse osmosis aren't directly applicable. And so we are spending a lot of our energy and resources in better understanding what desalination technologies can be used, how we can develop technologies that have the lowest amount of energy required to desalinate that water. But we also have to do some pre-treatment of that water and as well as post-treatment to make sure that if there are any remaining constituents in the water after it's desalinated, that those constituents would also be removed or polished, as we refer to them. So companies like the JIP that I referred to have come together to evaluate how best to solve these problems, what technologies offer the most opportunity, and also ensure the lowest reduction of risk, for instance, as well as all of the cost implications. How can we do this for the most cost-effective price?
Yeah, thanks for explaining that, Lisa. It's really neat, again, just building on that common theme of collaboration across private and public sectors, and how really there's that common desire to find a solution here in a way that is safe for the environment, for the people, and is sustainable into the future from a cost standpoint.
Dr. Pei, can you share with us a little bit about how the consortium is working with industry, such as Lisa and others, to help understand the results of the research and the treatment and what the path looks like going forward?
Absolutely. So it is very critical for the consortium to work with industry to demonstrate that bench and pilot scale projects with their treatment efficiency that can remove the contaminants in the goal to protect public health and the environment. So our research priorities are to evaluate the water quality and the treatment efficiency. So we have developed advanced analytical methods for the characterization of the produced water constituents, and also establish the method for assessing the toxicity impacts of the treated produced water. And these include targeted analysis to quantify the concentrations of constituents in water. And also, we conducted non-targeted analysis to detect the so-called unknown constituents in water. So with this method, we can identify the suspected contaminants. Right now, we are collaborating with the US EPA to use a online tool developed by EPA called Computational Toxicology Chemical Dashboard. This dashboard contains chemistry, toxicity, and exposure information of over 1 million chemicals. Then using this tool, it can help us to identify the chemicals to be removed through the treatment train. So in addition to the chemical analysis, we also established the testing methods to evaluate the ecotoxicity of treated produced water. And we have collected the water samples from the Permian Basin treated by the thermal distillation and post-treatment. We also collected the produced water samples from the San Juan Basin treated by the seawater reverse osmosis. The toxicity assays were tested using the various aquatic organisms, including the bacteria, the microalgae, water flea, and the fish. So we found that actually the post-treatment is very critical because some compounds can pass through the distillation process and then ended up in the distillate water. So through the post-treatment, we can remove almost all the contaminants, and the treated water does not exert toxic effect on the tested aquatic organism. We also found the feed water quality is very critical. And for example, for San Juan Basin water, if we use seawater RO, we can remove the compounds with toxicological behavior in produced water. So I want to emphasize that the pilot scale testing that have been conducted by the industry, such as the work led by Lisa, are very critical because that will allow us to collect water samples and then to evaluate the risks and the toxicology of the treatment for fit for purpose applications.
And Dr. Xu, let's pause for a sec and explain for our listeners that there's two major oil basins in New Mexico. There's the San Juan Basin in the northwest side of New Mexico, and there's the Permian Basin in the southeast of New Mexico. Now, Dr. Xu, can you talk more about the risk and toxicology assessment for us?
Right. I think those physical chemical analysis and the biological analysis just a part of our holistic risk and toxicology assessment framework. And Dr. Mahoj Schkula has also conducted the greenhouse experiments to evaluate the impact of produced water for irrigation.
Thanks, Dr. Xu, for mentioning Dr. Schkula and his research efforts. There's actually a great opportunity to bring him into the conversation. Dr. Schkula, I'd like to hand it over to you now.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Liz and Yvonne. Yeah, it's a very interesting topic so far. Whatever the other speakers have told us, that definitely a lot of good progress has been made with regard to the reuse of the produced water. Let me just start with the common knowledge that we have that our state, especially the New Mexico, has undergone these cycles of drought and really good water availability. And I think 15, 16 years ago, we really thought that this will be just another cycle. Unfortunately, this time the drought has continued for a very long period of time, and we are also not really sure when this cycle will end. And because of the low availability of the water for irrigation, people are looking for alternate water sources. Generally, arid regions, just like us, or you look around anywhere in the world, there are a lot of areas which can be brought into agriculture, which are not currently under agriculture, mainly because of the lack of water or water scarcity. And some of those areas certainly can benefit if the treated produced water is applied to those areas. Not to mention that if the quality of the water is appropriate, it can eventually also become part of the other irrigation for the other irrigated food cropped areas also. But in the beginning, we can certainly bring the treated wastewater. There are lots of rangeland in the state of New Mexico, and some of them are highly degraded. And the main reason is the water scarcity. So, some of that water, which could be of a variable quality, can be used in those areas, and it can also be applied to some other marginalized areas, and that is going to serve many different purposes. Number one, if the rangeland becomes again healthy, that is good for the environment, that is good for producing more food for the animal. And if we can do that, we are certainly supporting the USDA's mission of food security, because animal or meat is a very important component of that. The only thing is that we'll have to be very careful when we are using the produced water. We should know the quality of the produced water, and based upon the quality of the produced water, we should first apply the water to those areas where the water table is really deep. And once we take some of those precautions, I think there is a lot of scope for using the produced water for the benefit of the mankind. I heard a word long time ago, and I really like that word, human sustainability. That could be a long way for human sustainability in arid areas.
Thanks, Dr. Shukla. Now, I want to clarify real quick for our guests that when you mention produced water, you are referring to treated produced water. As your studies have indicated, treated produced water has a potential for fit-for-purpose applications. And your comments indicate the criticality of the research and the testing to fully understand the impacts of treated produced water on plants and animals. Now, as you mentioned, kind of we got to be very diligent in that work. And I know that you're conducting some studies. Can you share with us a little bit about the studies that you're leading and working on?
We are doing some greenhouse work, and of course, why we are conducting our studies in the greenhouse, because if you do it out in the farm, you have to spend a lot more money by putting those liners in place so that water does not leak below a certain depth. And that is why it's much more easy to do the greenhouse experiments, as well as it is a lot more easier for us to dispose of all of those soils in a way so that it does not affect the environment, or it does not in any way contaminate soil at any other locations. So one of the project that we started was with a company known as the HPOC LLC. And so what happened, they provided us with the produced water, and that produced water was about 10,000 parts per million salinity. And since the chemical analysis showed that there is no radon or any other contaminants in that water, so we run that experiment with 5 cool season grasses, those grasses that can be grown in the northern New Mexico. And what we did, we used the raw produced water. We also, had the treated produced water, and then we also used the diluted produced water at two different salinity levels, just so that we have a very good idea across a gradient of irrigation water salinity, what will be the response of the crop of these cool season grasses to the different levels of salinity. And we did see that, 4 out of 5 species, they did not survive beyond the first cut at the highest salinity level, at the raw salinity level. But for all other levels, we were able to see that plant responded very well to the salinity levels. We followed the way the standard operating procedure, the way a farmer will do that every 3 months he will go for a cut and then let the grass grow up again and then go for a second cut. So yeah, we went all the way up to the 4 cut, and we could see that except for the raw produced water, for everything else, all 4 cool season grasses performed really very well.
Now, Dr. Schkula, let's summarize your experiments for our listeners. Once again, you ran experiments with different levels of salt concentration in a greenhouse, and you were trying to see how the grasses would perform at different levels of salt concentration. You had the raw high salt concentration and then the other experiments at lower salt levels. The test done at the high raw salt concentration appeared that the grass really didn't do very well, whereas with the lower salt concentrations, it sounds like the grass performed pretty well. Dr. Schkula, keep telling us more about the experiments that you ran.
So this second experiment is supported by the NGL water solutions. And for this experiment, we used two species of Atriplex. And why did we use these two? Because we know that Atriplex species are salt tolerant. So the produced water, the original raw produced water, was very close to 250,000 parts per million. So we knew that this is very high water content, and we want to look at the salinity tolerance, that threshold of salinity tolerance for the Atriplex species, a work which is never done so far. So we diluted it initially in the beginning. Of course, we ran through the carbon filter and all of those things so that the oil part of that is removed from the water. And we could see that these two species performed really well. And interestingly enough, we knew that both these species have a mechanism of excreting the salt through their cells in the leaves. And we can very clearly see that, the whole plant and the leaves were covered with white salt. But when you just rub those leaves out, and you can still see the chlorophyll in those leaves, and both Atriplex canescens and Atriplex lentiformis performed very well, almost up to a salinity level of 55,000 parts per million. And at that stage, we did see that the canescence showed some stress and some loss of the biomass, but the other species, lentiformis, was still doing great. So these experiments does show that there is a potential of even applying some highly saline water to the crops, and still grow some of these species, which probably, unless there is a heavy metal or radon or any other contaminant, these leaves can certainly be used for as a animal fodder. So of course, we were very successful with regard to our both the objectives, to identify the threshold level of these two species, and number two, the survival. One other thing that we learned from that project was that these species are not irrigated the way a normal food crop is irrigated, because you only need to irrigate them 2 or 3 times during the whole growing season, and that is going to prevent the type of salinity buildup that can otherwise take place in the soil. So means, with a proper irrigation management, we do see that there is a chance, there is an option for us to grow these crops and meet the USDA's mission of food security.
That is really encouraging, Dr. Schkula. Thank you for sharing that with us. So, Dr. Schkula, can you also talk to us about the differences between using treated produced water and other brackish waters on plant viability and soil health?
Yes, certainly. Essentially, if you look at the brackish water, anything above a 1,000 parts per million, we start calling it the brackish water. And brackish water salinity also could be highly variable. It can go all the way up to 35,000. But yeah, we also ran several experiments with the brackish water. And in fact, we realized that if you are slightly above the salinity threshold of a certain food crop, you can actually cause some positive changes in that species. For example, we saw that sugar content of the tomato increased when we subjected it to little bit more abiotic stresses associated with water and salt. We also see pecan oil content decreased. And also we have seen the improvement of the chili quality. So, as long as either of these water only have salinity and they do not have any type of contaminants like metal or radon or anything, I think both should produce a nearly similar response. Of course, with the produced water, there will be some issues with oil content in the water, but as long as that oil content can be brought down, I think there should be very similar results whether we are looking at the produced water or the brackish water.
Before we wrap up, I want to hand it back to any of our guests to make any final comments or closing statements for our audience.
Yes, so with the ongoing water scarcity, we do need alternate water sources to not only sustain the agriculture as well as the human here in this area. However, I will certainly suggest that the water quality must be considered and to its as many details as possible before applying that water to anywhere, whether we are applying it to a halophyte or we are applying to a fodder crop within or outside of the irrigated agricultural areas.
I want to add on what Manoj said and to reiterate that the consortium implements a holistic state of the science pathway for produced water treatment, management, and fit for purpose reuse outside on the gas field. I'm very grateful for Liz and Evan for this opportunity to talk about our research activities in the consortium and some of the preliminary results. So we will continue to communicate our research progress and research findings to public and to stakeholders. Thank you so much for the opportunity.
Well, truly, thank you to our guest today. We're so appreciative of all the work you're doing. And we also want to thank our listeners for listening to this episode of Let's Talk Water, sponsored by the New Mexico Produced Water Research Consortium. If you want to check out more information, go to the consortium website at https://nmpwrc.nmsu.edu/. For more information. You can also just Google the New Mexico Produced Water Research Consortium. And we hope that you'll join us for our sixth and final episode. In this episode, we're going to talk to the State of New Mexico representatives of the Environment Department, the New Mexico Oil and Gas Division of the State Energy Agency, the New Mexico State Engineer, and a New Mexico State Legislator, where we talk about looking forward, looking at the various paths and timelines for the ultimate fit for purpose treatment and reuse of produced water to accelerate oil field water stewardship in support of improved freshwater conservation and overall water resource sustainability in the Southwest. Thank you again for listening and hope you join us next time.